Opposing Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about EQ, boosting versus cutting. Now, this is a topic that has a lot of information out there. There's a lot of advice that follows underneath specific categories. So this isn't a mixing tutorial. This is a critical listening tutorial. So we're going to be looking at sort of how to hear the EQ, how the frequencies are affected with our new knowledge. And I'm speaking in reference to the combination tone video and the beats video. So I have written out a string part, okay? And what I have here, now we need to keep in mind that some of these phenomena are psychoacoustic, and so we can alter that by altering the frequencies, but we're not actually changing the phenomena directly, if that makes any sense. That the phenomena going on in our head is altered indirectly by us altering the frequencies given. Whereas if we alter the frequencies with an EQ in relevance to beats, we're altering the actual phenomena of the beats. Like there's physical things that are actually changing. So it's important to sort of just be aware of that. It's not like mega important, like people mix all the time without any knowledge of these things. But that because you know of these things, you have an edge. You are able to make more deliberate decisions. And it's easier to get a little bit of inspiration when you know what the problem is. So I've written out this chord movement with a small bass line and a melody, and it's all one part, string. They're playing staccato. And we're going to EQ it, right? We're going to mess with it. Now, of course, this has already been recorded, and we need to be aware of the mic positions. This has gone through mic positions. It's gone through processing. It's in contact, which means these samples have had a fair amount of work. But they've been preserved in a way that sounds pretty reasonably real. So what we're going to do now, of course, we could always improve it, is we're going to go over here. We're going to throw an EQ on it. Now, I'm going to let you go through the vast arrays of EQs out there in the universe. I'm going to go with something simple just to keep it simple. We have our fruity parametric EQ too. And now we're specifically just going to be talking about boosting versus cutting. And I chose strings just because, it's kind of a broad instrument. It's got a lot of harmonics in it. It's a good one to mess with. But this changes quite dramatically depending on the instrument and the qualities you want to bring out. So you'll boost and cut accordingly. But the old myth is you cut, and there's actually books that say that cutting always sounds better, and that's just total bullcrap. But if you agree with it, then you can list your argument down below. But I think it's such BS. So boosting sounds different. Cutting sounds different. It's the same deal. They sound different. Now, the reason why boosting generally sounds unnatural, because you'll never, in nature, a boost like this rarely happens. It just doesn't happen unless you're like maybe in some sort of a weird pipe situation. Sometimes boosts like this can happen. Rooms with really severe standing waves, I guess that could happen as well. Or it's like any glass or metal will sort of have a boost of this sort of nature, but it's mostly just in the harmonic content that can resonate with it. So it's not even really a boost like that. But also because you have reflections in the world around you, so they are going to influence this sort of this is going to be brought out to be more like that in the real world. So that's one reason why people say that boosting like that sounds not good. That's because it's just not that naturally occurring. We're not used to hearing that. And in cutting, you can though, because cuts like this can occur. Specific frequencies can get absorbed by materials. They get absorbed all the time, and depending on where they hit. And so this does occur actually quite a bit more often, because absorption is a little more because of the whole reflection deal. If that makes any sense. Okay, reflections will broaden, they'll cause our boost to affect a couple more frequencies, whereas a absorption will reduce a particular frequency. That's very common. Like the human body's great at absorbing things, and now it's normally up there in the high end. Low end stuff, it can sound like things get quite thin. And so let's just now the main reason why let's talk about this. When things are boosted or cutting, the main reason why people who are advising new people on EQ, you want to do broad boosts, and then you don't want to boost normally, you want to cut mostly, is because of a gain issue. People who are new to mixing will be mixing to 0 dB or whatever. And sometimes it's a fun experiment to do. You get different sounding mixes. It's not necessarily bad, but what happens is they'll end up boosting because they want things to stick out of their mix, and then they'll be like, oh, I want this amount, these frequencies to stick out because the kick needs these, but the kick needs some snap too. And at that point, you're basically just turning up the kick. So you might as well just turn this down and just turn the kick up and turn everything else down, because once you hit the ceiling, there's really nowhere to go. So the solution is you monitor louder, and you mix to a lower point, like you mix to 9 or 6 decibels, -6 or -9, and you just monitor louder. That's your issue. You're just monitoring too soft. And because if you monitor too soft, they're going to be mixing up here, and you're going to have no room to boost stuff when you hit that roof. And so that's just something, that's the main reason why people have that in their head so hard, is because of this roof. But boosting in reality, if you're mixing down here, can be quite an advantageous thing. So let's just look at how we can affect these strings here with our boosts and our cuts. And of course, we need to make sure our strings have healthy levels. Now, when I'm working, I pay very little attention to my levels. So all the time I'm dealing with this roof right here. But when I go to my mix down stage, I approach it very differently. So there's a couple ways. There's the creative way you approach EQ, and then there's the mixing way. Not to say the mixing way isn't creative, but you're in a different mindset. Your goal is clarity and accomplishing a particular level of importance or degree. You're trying to get it to fit in a particular spot. Whereas when you're doing it creatively, you're just doing whatever sounds good. If that sounds like a good idea, you do that thing. It doesn't even matter if it follows conventional advice or not. You do whatever you think should be done. So let's go ahead and just look at our levels real quick, because we're going to approach this a little bit from a mixing standpoint. So here we go. And we're fine. We're not even like, see, there you have it. So our peaks are like around like -18, almost to 15 dBFS. So we're fine. So we have appropriate room to do this. Now, something else that you need to be aware of is when these things sum together. So if you have a lot of things, even though this is soft, if you sum it together with a lot of other elements, your master bus will be much louder. Just because these aren't peaking, your master bus has got to sum all this stuff. So you want to be aware of that stuff. If you're new, that might just not be stuff. But anyways, that's why they claim boosting is like never good and stuff. People who say that. Now, people who are legit, every legit person I met says, oh, boosting's fine. You just got to, call it when you see it. So let's go ahead and talk about let's just talk about some effects of boosting versus cutting. So if we boost unnaturally, this is what you get, like that one ringing frequency. It's almost like you have a sine wave oscillator inside your strings in this case. One reason why people boost is so that now this isn't a mixing tutorial, but they'll find this frequency that's particularly loud, and they'll turn that one down a little bit. And the reason why they do that is so they can turn it on average up. So it gives you a more even volume. And there's a whole list of other reasons why you would do that. But basically, see how that just doesn't sound that natural? But if we do some broader strokes, we can affect the timbre of some general areas and create some quite nice sounds. So when you're listening to it, you want to be aware of what your original sounds like. If you don't have an original to reference, or you've never recorded strings before, it'll be really hard to tell what the processing is. So I don't have any raw strings to show you. But if you listen to some classical recordings, they do not touch the instruments very much. They do not. They try and keep the performance intact. And you'd be surprised at what strings sound like. If you've only listened to pop recordings, you've kind of been lied to on what some of these instruments sound like. So when they start off, so that could be a real challenge at the beginning for hearing these sorts of things on instruments. So we get like a boxy tone. We've gone through in previous videos in this series all the different sort of names people associate with where an EQ lies. And you also see that our gain goes up quite substantially, but it's only for those frequencies. So people encourage cutting. Cutting normally is a good idea. I'm not against the philosophy that cutting is normally better. I'm just saying some people are they go a little too crazy with it. So now let's look at what cutting will sound like. So that's what boosting sounds like, and it does sound a little unnatural and unsettling. So here's the cut, and we're doing broad, relatively broad. I mean, we could get really broad. And now when we're doing this, we're getting rid of phenomena that contribute to the way an instrument sounds. For example, there are beats in there. They're in there, but they're so subtle and small that they're part of the nuance of the instrument. The other thing that's in there is the combination tones. And when you reduce these, you not only reduce these frequencies, but you reduce the combination tones that were happening. So that's the other big takeaway from this video is when you reduce frequencies, you are damaging the combination tones as well, which do contribute, and as we looked at with the piano, are a pretty important part of a way an instrument can sound. So when we do this, they get thin, and you're hitting it twice. You're not just hitting it once, you're hitting it twice. So anyways, so if we take out the highs, now we could talk about a little more advanced of a concept. So we talked about how when we combine them, now the combination tones don't exist for very long in a sound like this because of how short the attack is. But when we do this, the lows their frequencies are very close together. So the low end will tend towards beats because frequency-wise, they're much closer. The high end will tend towards combination tones. So that's why when the high comes out, the lows sound so boomy, and there can be a lot of like phase issues. Not necessarily, when people hear phase issues, you might have this, I don't know, you might think of a particular sound. I encourage you to not do that because phasing issues can sound like this. So if we just take them down. So the way our low end is happening right now is it's very nice, and that's the way we expect strings to sound, but there's a degree of phase cancellation that's naturally occurring. So we can say with accurately that there is phasing in the signal. You can say that about almost every signal. And learning where the phasing is and where the summing is can really change the way you decide to record an instrument. Like where you put your mic. Some people are real sticklers about where they put it because they've learned to figure out where these things are, because you're also going to experience phase cancellation in reality where you stand during a live performance, that the waves will be hitting you at particular moments and canceling each other out depending on where you are in space. So this is just something I'm trying to bring your attention to when you're hearing an EQ and what they do and why an EQ will behave a particular way. So now let's try some narrow cutting. So let's say that now this isn't the thickest thing to start with, but we'll do some narrow cuts. Now you can hear, now I can hear it. I don't know how trained your ear is, how much practicing you've done, but you can actually hear as I move it around the change in the timbre of the instrument, and it affects the overall instrument. There's a couple reasons why. We talked about one of them is that when you have cuts like this, you're going to be inducing phase shifts, so that'll affect the whole spectrum very subtly. The other reason is when you have cuts like this, you're removing part of, not only do you have the phase shifts of the frequencies around it, but you're removing a frequency that was originally being summed with all the other frequencies, or at least greatly attenuating it. So cuts like this are certainly super audible, and sometimes they create dramatic differences if a particular tone was very loud. But in this case, when most of them are pretty subdued, we don't have anything that's like sticking out like a red herring, we notice different things. It changes timbrally what's going on, but in a much more subtle, natural way. Actually, that's quite audible right there. But you see how it's far less noticeable than this. That's because instead of, and again, my theory is, of course, the natural occurring thing that things absorb. There are materials out there that do absorb one frequency better than others just naturally. Like a book might resonate with a particular frequency and then remove it from your room. So there's just issues like that. It's quite interesting when you walk into a room that has a particular issue like that. But that's my 2 cents on, boosting versus cutting, the ideas behind them, that it's not bad, but and when you boost, those are some of the things you get. You're emphasizing particular qualities. It can sound quite nice sometimes. It can sound quite not nice sometimes. I use it all the time in my sound design. And and the other thing is you're affecting combination tones and beat frequencies as you do this. And cutting will also affect those phenomena, which is one thing that it's just another dimension of EQ you can be aware of. It's not bad to think of, oh, I'm taking a frequency out like you are, but it's also good to know that this one frequency is not the only thing that you're changing. And I feel like a lot of people have that opinion, like, oh, I'm only affecting this frequency. All the other ones are perfectly the same as they were before. That's just not true. So Yes, if you have any questions, let me know. If you have anything you'd like to tell me, maybe you disagree with something I've said, let me know. I'm open to new ideas. I'm open to the way you think about things. I just want to understand what you think. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.